How successful have your innovation programs been? Not really sure? The ability to measure impact is key to securing the long-term support from your manager. Without that support, your innovation program will be just yet another management fad that will fade into the background. I'll be right back.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
With management teams that just don't get it, that just don't get the idea behind innovation and the need for it within an organization, there is this impression that innovation is more art than science. They believe that innovation or creativity is the magic skill bestowed upon a few, and that their job as managers is simply just to wait around and capture the lightning bolts, capture the accidents as they happen. Why is this such a strong belief? It's because these managers have the fundamental belief that you cannot measure the impact from innovation, and that it's purely magic. You can't measure the overall program, the success. You cannot put together the right set of metrics to incent an innovation team to go off and create those next great products. And it's my fundamental belief that those management teams are wrong. The real issue is not the fact, can you measure the impact from innovation? The real issue is that most corporate reporting systems don't track the right data. They're hung up on GAAP financial accounting processes and forget about the both tangible and intangible assets of creativity, of innovation, of ideas, and the impact they have on organizations. The result is that this forces many innovation teams to have to go out and create their own metrics, create their own data capture mechanisms in order to prove their value to management teams. So, what are the right metrics that should be captured? Now, I covered this topic, it's got to be 18 months or so ago in a podcast, but felt that it was worth the effort to update it with also some new metrics that I've been using recently within my organization that I have found to be very useful. So, what are the right metrics? Well, I'm going to run through a list of them, and this is not by far an exhaustive list, but these are the core metrics that I use, that I look at, and that I report out to management teams. First off, what is the R&D spend for the portfolio? What is your target R&D spend? Now, what I'm not talking about here is what is the overall dollar amount to be spent. What I'm talking about here is what is the mix of R&D spend across the portfolio segments. And what I mean by portfolio segment is that there should be some percentage of your R&D spend that's invested in the core products, the products that are generating the revenue for the business today. Now, these are products that have typically been around for a long period of time, and there is some ongoing R&D investment that needs to happen. So what is the target spend for your core? Next is what is your target spend for adjacencies? Taking your core products and going after new geographies, going after new customer segments that you're currently not serving today, modifying the product to go after existing customers but with a new solution offering. How much of your R&D spend is going after adjacencies? And then last but not least, how much of your R&D spend is going after fundamentally new areas, new products, new services, new programs that your customer base would not normally attribute it to you or your business? Now, I'm not looking for hard dollars. I've actually, in my organization, we define that as a split. What percentage, if your total R&D spend is X dollars, then what percentage of that goes to your core, what percentage goes to your adjacencies, and what percentage goes to new? Now, the key question here is go back 2 to 3 years and look at what you historically have spent. Go back and see what you've spent on your programs historically, and then look to set new targets in order to drive those new kinds of investment areas. Now, what are the real definition of adjacencies and what is really the fundamental definition of new? Now, this opens up a lot of questions on definitions. And after much thought and much attempts to try to define this, using some kind of descriptive words, we've actually fallen back on using a very simple metric, and that is gross margin. So if you're fundamentally investing in the core product, you're fundamentally looking to maintain or slightly improve your current average gross margin for your product. Now, if you're going after some new adjacency, that adjacency, given that you're going to offer a unique product, should be able to enjoy some premium in the gross margin. Maybe that's 20%, maybe that's 25%. If you're going after fundamentally new areas, you should have a significantly higher gross margin, 50%, 100% better gross margin than your current product. Because if you're not able to generate that kind of gross margin improvement, then why are you making the investment? So again, our definition, or the definition that I like with regards to core, is basically fundamentally maintaining the current gross margin with some slight improvement, maybe 15, 20%. Adjacencies, you're going to get some kind of a margin premium, or you should be able to get some kind of a margin premium, and therefore you should be looking at 25 to 30% improvement in the gross margin. And then fundamentally new, you need to be able to at least get a 50%, if not 100% improvement on the gross margin. And so again, look at your spend historically and look to see how you can drive or incent the teams to invest their R&D dollars into the right areas of core, adjacencies, and new. Next, look at the R&D spend between people and programs. Look at where your actual dollars are being spent. How much of that's going to salaries and compensation for your teams, and how much of that is actually going into programs, building of prototypes, doing customer beta tests, etc. And the key here is that there's really no set percentage as to what should be people versus programs. But if you are constantly seeing where you are starved on the program dollars and you're looking at your people and program spend, that may be one metric that you can use with your manager to show where you need to expand, for instance, program spend. The other thing is when it comes to your people dollars, don't ignore your contingent or contract employees. Include those in on your people dollar spend because those really are headcount. And in some cases, they get hidden away within your financial reporting systems and don't get tracked properly. So show your headcount, both your headcount of the actual employees and your headcount of contingent labor, but then also show your programs. And show that to management. Show them what your total dollar spend is, and then what percentage of that is programs and what percentage of that is your people. And again, go back a couple of years and look at the historical trend for your organization. Next is when you're looking at your people, really dig in on your R&D resources or your headcount. What percentage of your people spend goes to individual contributors versus management? Now, some R&D organizations that have been around for a long time and the average tenure for your employees is fairly long, you're going to see a shift towards more management and less individual contributors. And that's a bad sign. You need real R&D people doing real work and creating real products. And the general ratio here is that you should have 80% individual contributors to 20% management. If that number starts to get to 75-25, that should be a flag. Anything lower than 75% of your R&D staff as individual contributors, then that's a big flag from the standpoint that you've got people tied up in management and you've got fewer actual workers, people actually delivering against creating new products, new ideas, and new services. The other question you should ask on your R&D resources is where are they located? If most of your growth is occurring, let's say in the US and you're an overseas company, but your R&D is overseas, maybe that's not a good sign. The flip side is that if you're a US based company and most of your growth is occurring in China or India or Brazil, and you have little to no R&D in those countries, that's not a good sign either. You need your R&D or some portion of your R&D to be close to where your customers are located at. So where are they located? And then what skills or expertise do they have today? And what skills and expertise are they going to need to have in 5 years, given the trends in your respective industry? And if need be, you need to retrain and reskill your R&D organization ahead of the needs of the marketplace. It isn't the situation where you can sit back and wait and then begin to retrain or reskill your R&D organization. Your R&D organization should be the first organization that is reskilled and retargeted with new capabilities in order to enable those growth opportunities for your business. Next, what is the R&D impact to product gross margin? Now, here is the metric that I probably find the most useful from the standpoint of understanding what am I really getting for R&D spend. Now, why gross margin? Well, the theory is that if you develop a better mousetrap, your customers are going to be willing to give you a gross margin premium for that new mousetrap. So, what better financial metric can you use to measure your impact to R&D than gross margin? And so what is the gross margin impact from the R&D investment on each product? Now, this is a hard one to measure in some cases because gross margin may get aggregated up by product group or division of your company or whatever organizational segment, but you need to be able to look at gross margin impact to your R&D. Now, the problem also here is that the gross margin that you're getting from your product today is a result of your R&D investment in the past. And not all industries operate on the same time delay. Some organizations, maybe it's 1 year. So R&D investment a year ago is what is the result of the gross margin impact of the product today. In some cases, it could be 5 or 10 years. Whatever that horizon is, you need to be able to go back, capture what that R&D investment is, and then measure today's gross margin to see what the return is on that R&D spend. And that becomes a key metric for you to report to your management as they look to drive both top-line revenue growth and, with pressure from Wall Street, to show continuous improvement in your gross margin. Next is kind of a variation looking at what is the revenue and gross margin from the portfolio. So your overall R&D spend, what is the revenue and gross margin from the entire product line based on age? So, how much revenue and gross margin is coming from products that were introduced within the last year, or within the last 3 years, within the last 5 years? The general trend is that you're going to have higher gross margin and potentially even higher revenue, but that's not always the case, for products that are relatively newer. Products that have been out on the market and out on the shelf for a longer period of time typically will have a lower gross margin. Why? Because your competitors have been able to see the products that you've built and have come into your market and have copied those products or come up with products that are more competitive against the products that you've had out for some period of time. And the key here with this metric is to incent the continuous introduction of new products. As you show that new products are contributing and delivering higher and higher percentage of your overall gross margin, then that obviously becomes a key metric to making sure that you don't sit back and let the products in your portfolio get too old. Because the older they get, the more pressure you'll have on the revenue and the more pressure you will have on being able to deliver the gross margin that your investors are looking for. So again, look at your revenue and gross margin across your entire product portfolio and then break it down by age and use whatever age brackets are appropriate for your industry. If you're in the consumer electronics industry, maybe it's every, products introduced in less than 6 months and less than 18 months and older than 3 years old. If you're in other kinds of industries, maybe it's every 2 years, 2-year segments. Whatever it is, come up with whatever the age breakdown is and look at your revenue and gross margin contribution for products that fall into each of those age categories. And next, look at your internal versus external R&D projects. Now, the key here is the fact that many organizations get so wound up in developing and launching internal R&D projects because of their size or success, or because they believe that they've got some unique perspective. They become so internally focused that the entire industry passes them right by. Some young startup comes up with a much better idea and basically leaves them in the dust. Perfect example would be something like Google passing right by Yahoo. Yahoo had a chance to invest or buy Google early on, chose not to because they felt that since they were the leaders, they had the unique expertise. And now look what's happened as a result of becoming too internally focused. The key here is to set yourself some metric, some measurement that you're going to hold yourself to look at internal versus external R&D projects. And what I mean by external is whether that's investing or whether that's cooperating in an R&D program, acquiring certain inventions, acquiring patents, looking external to the industry to see where the trends are going. However you want to measure whatever's appropriate for your industry, set a percentage of what projects you are going to be funding that'll be externally targeted. Whether that's, if you look at Procter & Gamble, they have a 50% target for external. In some businesses, in some industries, I've seen it go, 30% external. Whatever is appropriate for your business and your industry, set an external target and then hold your R&D organization to meet that external target. It forces them to get up out of their chair, get outside the four walls, and see what's going on. You'll have less likely a risk of being blindsided by forcing the R&D organization to get up and get outside the four walls. Now, with all this talk about metrics, there are some metrics that are used in the industries that are absolutely meaningless. One that particularly just gets under my craw is R&D as a percentage of revenue. Now, this is a number that is used by Wall Street analysts. It is used by the press. It is a misused metric. It is absolutely meaningless. R&D as a percentage of revenue is not an indicator of future growth or future success. And it has no proven impact to the overall success of the business, whether that be share price, revenue growth, gross margin. It has no impact. Why? Because sales has so many other dependencies on it beyond just R&D, whether that's the effectiveness of marketing, the effectiveness of the sales organization, things that R&D has no ability to control and no ability to impact. That's why I'm a big proponent towards focusing the metric on gross margin, not on revenue. But this is one of those metrics that will never die. It is still around. It's still used by management teams. It is used by Wall Street, but it is absolutely meaningless. Another one that I've heard is R&D spend per employee or per R&D employee. Now, I don't know where this one keeps coming back from, but this one ought to have been killed off a long time ago. And most financial analysts recognize that this absolutely has no bearing on the R&D spend. R&D is about products, not how much each employee can spend. So I'm not sure why this metric keeps hanging around, but again, it's another one that is totally meaningless. So once you've got your metrics, whatever the right ones are for your industry and your segment, what is it? How often should you be reporting these out? What's the right cadence for reporting this out? Well, my general rule of thumb is I report out the metrics for R&D on a quarterly basis. So each quarter, do a benchmark against your direct competitors. Understand what your competitors' R&D metrics are and compare yourself, both as gross margin impact, the portfolio investment, internal versus external, resources, split between core, adjacencies, and new. Whatever metrics you're using, report them out on a quarterly basis. But most importantly, stack yourself up against your competitors. Understand how your competitors are driving their R&D spend to the point where you can understand how your response to that R&D spend can either be an advantage or can be a disadvantage. On your core metrics, over time, pick a historical horizon that works for your industry. Go back and create the metrics. So whether that's a 1-year back look or a 3-year back look, whatever's appropriate for your industry, develop the core metrics so that you can look at the trend lines over time. And you need to use that same trend for your competitors. So if your industry typically is go back and look 3 years historically, then you need to do the same for your competitors. And then again, you also need to report out on what any new projects have come into the portfolio, such that management has a good insight into the right level of decision making that's being applied to selecting which projects you go into. On an annual basis, go back and adjust your portfolio target. So what percentage of your R&D spend is going to go into core, adjacencies, and new? Those don't get locked into a set number and then just let it sit. It's kind of like rebalancing your 401k or your retirement investments between stocks and bonds. You need to adjust the portfolio mix depending on what's happening in your industry, the risk that's coming up in your industry. Maybe you need to accelerate in the new areas because there's some fundamental shifts, but adjust those percentages on an annualized basis. And once you've begun to track both on the quarterly basis and on an annual basis, once you've begun to track and report, get the right metrics to be included into the executive reporting packages. So every quarter, if you're a public company, there's packages that typically get created by the finance department that gets handed up through the executive ranks. Get your innovation metrics included into that executive packet. Get the executives used to looking at those innovation metrics each and every quarter. And then once you've got that going, get your innovation metrics to be included in annual performance targets. Get executives, managers, and individual contributors as appropriate to include innovation metrics as performance targets. Why? Because people work to metrics. If you set the right metrics, then you're going to have people doing the right actions. Key here, though, is make sure it's the right targets. It's the right metric measurements. Now, the key here is with managers, it really is about portfolio investment. If your target was X percentage for core, X for, some percentage for adjacencies and some percentage for new, did you hit those levels of investments? And then also R&D impact to gross margin. Are the products that are coming out achieving the gross margin that was committed to when the R&D program was started? And measure those people who were on that R&D team. It'll start changing people's thought processes. It's not about just getting the cheapest product out or the product out on time, but you got to hit the gross margin. You got to deliver some form of sustained differentiation that your customer is willing to give you the premium for. Now, if you already have innovation metrics within your organization, congratulations. You're one of the few, and you're way ahead of the game. If you don't have metrics, if your organization does not use innovation metrics to measure its level of investments and its impact to the organization, a couple things I'm going to point out to you that I think are quite obvious. One is, it's not going to be easy to get management to start tracking the metrics. You're going to have to do the heavy lifting. You're obviously listening to this podcast because of your interest in innovation, and whether that's in your own personal life or whether that's in your career opportunity at the current employer or a future employer. But let's face it, when you're the lone wolf in there talking about innovation and how it's going to impact the organization, the burden of proving impact, of proving value, is going to fall in your lap. So you're going to have to do the heavy lifting to pull together the initial numbers. Consistency in producing and measuring the innovation metrics will eventually take hold. It'll eventually will become part of the corporate culture, but you can't give up. This is where perseverance kicks in. You got to deliver the numbers. You got to show the metrics each and every quarter going forward, to the point where management then almost becomes to the point of expecting that number to be reviewed and therefore show the impact of innovation. And then once impact is evident, once you've shown the historical view of the numbers and you've been reporting it out consistently, and management can start to see that people's investment decisions are being made differently, the results of the growth in gross margin and in revenue, success of key products, the management is going to want to look back into historical to see what results or what impacted that, in this case innovation, and what is it they can do now to have even a broader or better impact on the overall organization. So having the historical numbers is key, and reporting those out each and every quarter is key in order to show that having the right metrics, incenting people to make the right level of investments is key, because the impact in the results will become evident. Now, as we know, those of us that are involved in innovation and creativity, and you as a listener of this podcast, innovation is just as important as capital investment in new machines. The ability to measure the impact from innovation investments is key to securing your executive support. Given the topic for this week's show is on measuring innovation impact, this week's killer question is on using metrics to help come up with ideas. How do you use metrics to come up with actual ideas? In a previous podcast, I've given you 5 key questions that each idea that you're looking to rank order or coming out of a brainstorming session must be able to answer. Those questions are: will this idea fundamentally change the customer experience or customer expectation? 2, will this idea fundamentally change the competitive landscape? And 3, will this idea change the financial structure of the industry? Now, for a given idea, you must be able to answer yes to one of these questions. The next 2 questions, you must be able to answer yes to both. First, does your company have some contribution to make in this space? Do you have some fundamental intellectual property, some fundamental expertise, core competencies, something? But do you have some contribution to make in this space? And then second, will this idea generate sufficient margin? Now, using these 5 questions, you can pretty quickly identify which ideas are going to have the biggest impact and which ones you should invest in. Now, the one question that has a metric tied to it that you need to understand is the last question. Will this idea generate sufficient margin? Well, what is sufficient? Well, sufficient really depends on your industry. What is the generally accepted gross margin that a new idea should be able to generate to be constituted as a success? Now, the metrics that I use for my organization when we're looking and evaluating ideas are the following. 1, revenue. Is the revenue at least 10 times the total lifetime R&D investment? Is revenue at least 10 times the total lifetime R&D investment? And with regards to gross margin, is the gross margin percentage from this product at least 2 times that of the industry average? Is the gross margin percentage at least 2 times that of the industry average? If I can't answer yes to both of those questions, then the idea is not going to generate sufficient enough margin and therefore not deliver the return on the overall R&D investment. So again, you can use metrics to help you filter through your ideation sessions, through your brainstorming sessions, to help rank order those ideas that are going to really be those killer ideas, those ideas that are so unique and so differentiated in the marketplace that you will capture a sufficiently higher level of revenue and gross margin to warrant the risk and to warrant the investment that you're asking management to make. This week's closing thought is on following the leader. When it comes to using innovation to have impact on your business, the best advice I can give you is to find leading companies and copy what they are doing. Ask yourself, how are they organized? How do they make decisions? How do they find or fund the right innovation investments? How do they find the right ideas? Then how do they fund them? And then benchmark your organization against the leaders. Use the innovation metrics and see where you can improve, and then focus your activities about becoming the best in class for your industry. The Olympic skier Jean-Claude Kelly said it best. The best and fastest way to learn a sport is to watch and imitate a champion. And the same applies to business. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Many of you have sent me an email wondering what was up since I haven't put out a podcast in a number of weeks. First off, the work schedule has gotten a little crazy. My travel schedule has also been a little crazy. And hopefully we're going to be wrapping up our relocation here in another couple of weeks and settling into our new house here in California. So I have not disappeared. I am still around. I am still working on future podcasts. I am still working on the CD project. For those of you who keep asking, yes, it is making progress. It is moving forward and has been one of the other things that has been taking up a little bit of my time. So I'm still around. So please continue to send me your feedback on the podcast at podcast@killerinnovations.com. Also, if you are a new listener to the podcast, go out to the killerinnovations.com site and you will see the list of the archive of all the podcasts going back almost over 2 years now, and you'll be able to see the entire list and the entire library of podcasts. And yes, we've just passed over the 2-year mark for the Killer Innovations podcast. This year has been a little bit slower than the first year, in which we did 50 shows. We did another 25 shows this year. We're going to try to pick the pace up again, going into our third year of producing the podcast. So again, I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen, provide feedback, provide comments, provide suggested topics. So please send me your feedback, send me your comments to my email address at podcast@killerinnovations.com. Don't forget to vote for your favorite podcast. I'm sure you listen to more than just this one podcast. So whatever podcast you are listening to, go out to the sites that you download the podcast from, whether that's Podcast Alley, Podcast Pickle, Apple, Dig, and vote. Let other people know the podcast that you find the most informative and the most helpful, and it helps pass the word around so others can find the podcast that you're finding so much that you find so helpful. Also, tell others about the podcast. As many of you know, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, that the reason I do this podcast is really as a way of paying it forward as a result of some mentoring that I got earlier in my career. A gentleman took time out of his schedule, one of my early managers, spent a lot of time with me, helping me coming out of college to be successful in my career. My only requirement to him was that I had to pay it forward when I later in my career, and this podcast is my way to pay it forward. And all I ask for you as a listener is to pay it forward by telling others. And with that, again, send me feedback. Feel free to drop me an email, go out and post a comment on the show notes, whatever you find most convenient for you. Join in on the conversation that's occurring out there on the website. And also, read my personal blog. I haven't posted to that as much as I would like to, but I'm going to try to pick that pace up also. But let's stay in touch. Send me your thoughts. I'm looking for ideas for future podcasts, so send me any ideas there, questions that you've kind of got nagging that you'd like for me to answer in a future podcast, and I'll see if I can't weave that in. And with that, we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.